Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jana Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you gardening inspiration and advice from experts across the state. We talk about vegetables, flowers, trees, shrubs, and of course, your lawn. Thank you for listening. I hope this show is something that you'll look forward to checking in with every week. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, Gardening Utah aims to inspire you and keep you in the know of what tasks you should be accomplishing in your yard and meet amazing, informative experts along the way. This show airs on the radio on the weekends here in Utah at 10 a.m. on 860 AM KKAT, and episodes drop every weekend on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, so hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. On today's show, I have a really interesting, informative, and kind of funny conversation with Mr. Cameron Alcott from ProgressivePlants.com, and we are going to talk about USDA Hardiness zones. It's a really common thing to think, oh, hey, we're in this zone and this plant matches my zone, so it must work perfectly in my yard, right? Well, Cameron and I are going to dispel that myth, and we're going to learn a lot about what does work and what doesn't in our yards, and where we can go to get the correct advice and information. This is a good one. Stay tuned. But first, the tip of the week.
860 KKAT with your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is how to properly feed the hummingbirds in your garden. Now, I seem to remember when I was a kid that the hummingbirds would come out sometime around Memorial Day and leave around Labor Day, but I feel like that's very different. And one of the good tips that I've heard is either try to put out a hummingbird feeder about a week before you expect hummingbirds in your yard. But I actually saw a hummingbird this week in my garden. So I'm always very excited when we see the first hummingbirds, and so immediately want to get the feed out. So here's the proper way to feed hummingbirds. First of all, the fact that a lot of the things you would find in the stores have the red liquid. That is not necessary for hummingbirds, and in fact is not ideal because of the food coloring that's inside that solution. So the best and the least expensive solution for your hummingbird feeder is a 1-to-4 solution of refined white sugar to tap water. So that's a 1/4 cup sugar to 1 cup of water. And I like to make it in bigger batches. So I typically will do maybe 3 cups of water and 3/4 cup of sugar. So you bring that solution to a boil and then you let it completely cool. And then, of course, before you fill your hummingbird feeder, you're going to want to make sure that it's completely clean. I like to clean mine with vinegar and shake it out really good and let it dry in the sun so it's free of any kind of bacteria and that sort of thing. And then you fill up your hummingbird feeder once it cools down and get it out there for the birds. Now, just remember that if you are refrigerating any extra solution, to bring it up to room temperature before you refill your hummingbird feeders. So again, the red coloring that you see in the stores is not necessary, so don't add any red food coloring to the liquid. The reddening chemicals can prove harmful to the birds, and nectar itself is a clear solution. So, yes, hummingbirds are attracted to red coloring, but the reality is the hummingbird feeders are already red on the base, so you're good to go there. And it's good to have a hummingbird feeder out in your yard because it's a supplemental source of nectar for your local hummingbirds, and it can help them through times when there aren't as many blooming flowers available nearby. So just remember, though, it is a commitment. So once you get it out there, if they're starting to get used to it, you're really going to want to make sure that you stay committed, keep it clean, and keep the insects out of it. And so in hot weather, the feeder should be emptied and cleaned at least twice a week. And in cooler weather, once a week is probably fine. So I typically do that every Saturday. And if your hummingbirds empty the feeder with greater frequency, then make sure that you clean it every time it's empty. That's very important because think about it, it's outdoors and it's getting, sun on it. So cleaning it with hot tap water works fine. Or again, like I mentioned, a weak vinegar solution, and try to avoid dish soaps because that can leave residue in the feeder. Now, most areas of North America, hummingbirds tend to leave during the winter, so it's best to put the feeder out about a week before they normally arrive in your yard. Now, here's a few plants really quickly that hummingbirds are attracted to if you want to bring more of them to your yard. They love bee balm, they love fuchsia and lantana, hollyhocks, rose of Sharon, butterfly bush, trumpet vine, and honeysuckle. So just make sure when you put your hummingbird feeders out in your garden to put them 6 feet apart, because hummingbirds get very territorial, and there's nothing like watching one hummingbird dive bombing another hummingbird at a feeder because they think that is their territory. It's quite entertaining. So make sure that you put your hummingbird feeders about 6 feet apart.
And that's your Gardening Utah tip of the week, brought to you by the Advocates. If you're in an accident, you deserve an advocate. Call 801-355-5550 or visit UtahAdvocates.com. Never miss a tip for your garden and never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
If you haven't already been able to figure it out, I just love hummingbirds, and I also love birds. I love watching all the birds in my yard. My house is kind of right across from a bird sanctuary, so I am lucky enough to see just some of the coolest birds and ducks. A lot of just different varieties of ducks that swim by in the river, and it's just so much fun. Okay, so what are you growing in your yard? Hashtag on Instagram, okay? I'm looking up the hashtag Gardening Utah. And you can find me on Instagram at Gardening Utah under the account. But if you would like me to see your post and repost it to our story, show me what you're growing. And you know what? You can even ask me a question that way. And hashtag it Gardening Utah, and I will repost it to our story because I love to see what's growing on all around Utah. Anyway, pun intended. I know that's totally nerdy, but this is a garden show, so that's where we are. So have you entered to win our contest at 860kkat.com? Click the contest button. You can enter to win a raised garden box worth $400, including delivery, from Q&R Box Gardens. They are gorgeous, and they were in a past episode. If you want to learn all about raised bed gardening, you can go back to our episode on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and find the episode with the team at Q&R Box Gardens, and we talk all about how to fill them and all the ins and outs of raised garden boxes. But if you would like to enter to win one, again, 860kkat.com, click the contest button and enter to win there. I hope you win. We are giving away one a month for the next 4 more months. We've already given 2 away the last 2 months. So really, really exciting there. Also, if you have not heard the episode that I did with John Webster from Go Biochar, I wanted to make sure that if you're interested in soil and soil composition and how to make the most amazing soil in your yard, you're going to want to go back to that episode and listen, because I'm telling you, it was so interesting. But they are giving away a free gallon of biochar to anyone who wants to try it. You just need to send him a direct message on Instagram. So look him up, Go Biochar on Instagram, send John Webster a message, and he will tell you how you can get your free gallon of biochar. And if he needs to mail it to you, you can just pay the mailing fees or whatever, but he will not charge you for the biochar, so that you can test it out in a container plant or maybe just around a certain section of vegetables in your garden, whatever works for you. Okay. We will be back after this quick break with Cameron Alcott. Stay with us right here on Gardening Utah.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and I've got Cameron Alcott with me today with ProgressivePlants.com. What's going on, Cameron?
Oh, not a whole lot. It's like spring in the nursery business, so you know what we are going through now.
I'm surprised I got you on the horn because I know how busy you are right now.
Yeah, it's been pretty crazy. We thought that the COVID year last year was pretty epic because everybody was at home doing renovations and getting into gardening and expanding what they were doing, which is great. And yeah, it hasn't let up, and in some ways is worse. It is unbelievably busy for everybody right now. I've been hearing all sorts of things from the local garden centers, and they are hammered.
Wow.
I'm really excited to be here because there's a lot of stuff that I think that we need to talk about now that everybody's going through, like, oh, I want to go out and start planting things and do stuff for my yard. And so there's a lot of excitement. And so I'm glad that we have the opportunity to kind of address some of the challenges that the industry is having right now, and how for people to kind of best prepare for all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, so this is like the very beginning of May. I can't believe it's May, by the way, but it's also so exciting because it's that planting time of year. And there are certain things that just because you see it in the nursery right now doesn't mean you should be planting them, particularly, annuals and vegetables that are not cold hardy. But in a week or two, we're going to be totally in the clear. But I think that kind of serves a little bit to what the whole purpose that we thought would be a really interesting topic today that so many people ask about, which is the USDA plant hardiness zones. And what do those really mean? And as far as being from Utah, what should we really be focusing on? What zone plants should we be making sure that we're purchasing and not purchasing, and what expectations we should have when we do purchase outside of our zone. So first of all, let's start at the beginning. It's the United States Department of Agriculture Plant Hardiness Zone Map. And what does it mean, Cameron?
Oh, well, this is going to be a very loaded discussion, I think. There's a lot of complexities. So the Utah Department of Agriculture have their cold hardiness zones. So basically what that means is that they take like a certain range of time, and then the average recorded temperature with a couple of extremes. That's what they put, on the map. So they'll take their little topographical map and they'll assign zones to things of how cold things are. This is more for like a lot of people who do things in agriculture, but it also has a huge relevance to nursery stock as well. So a couple of decades ago, they actually ended up rezoning the USDA map, and that's created even more confusion in the industry, particularly among homeowners. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. So before, I think it was 2002, it might have been a little bit later, a little bit earlier. I don't remember. I'm getting old and forgetting things. But when I was a kid, the USDA's hardiness zone listed us as at a zone 5. I don't remember what the negative temperatures were or what those extremes were, but all I know is that we were a zone 5. Now, I don't know if it's because of global warming or they have what they feel is more accurate data. They have upgraded like the Salt Lake Valley area to more of like a zone 7. And now they have like 7A and 7B. And They make it really more complex than what it really needs to be. So that's kind of created like a little bit of havoc, because plant vigor and whether or not something is going to survive here, cold hardiness is only a small part of it.
Yes.
So the hard part, and I'm not going to throw box stores under the bus, but I'm going to throw box stores under the bus. A lot of times they are going to carry plants that are rated for our zone, which is a zone 7, right? But anybody in the nursery business who's been doing this for a very long time is going to tell you zone 5, you're going to be safe. Okay. Now, of course, there's always exceptions to every rule. Okay. There are some zone 6 things that will live here, and there may even be some zone 7 things that will live here. But it's use at your own risk.
Yes.
As anybody knows, like being in Utah, sometimes our winters can, punch plants in the face, even if they are rated for our zone. I think this past winter, taught us a lot about irrigation over the winter, because we've been seeing a lot of people, on the Utah Gardeners Facebook group, we see a lot of things about like, boxwoods turning brown or laurels turning brown because of lack of moisture.
Yes.
Okay. So, just because we had a warmer winter, okay, the lack of humidity is also going to impact how things winter over here. And I don't know if you noticed, Jana, but I think we live in a pretty dry state.
Last time I checked, we were in a desert. Yes.
I mean, a couple days ago, it rained like an inch.
Yeah, that was kind of cool.
That was unusual. So your yard didn't flood, did it?
No, thankfully. It was actually a little touch and go there for a minute, but we did okay.
You did okay? You survived?
Yeah, I did.
But anyway, kind of going back to that, there's a lot of things that kind of come into play when it comes to survivability of plants. So general rule of thumb, if you want me to just break it down very, very simply for everybody out there, one, go to your local garden centers. They're the ones who are going to be able to tell you what's going to live, what's not going to live, because independent garden centers, they are more invested in their reputation of selling you plants that will be successful here, because your success is their success. Okay. So they will give you advice on what's going to grow, and they're only pretty much going to carry things that are going to grow. Now, they will give you some things that might be like a little bit more experimental. I know, Malie was on your show last week, and she was talking about, there's a guy up north is doing citrus. You have things like pawpaws. I mean, there are banana. Oh, Liz Hamilton's getting me a banana plant, just FYI.
No way. Is she really?
Yeah.
Wait, she's getting you the plant? Isn't this supposed to be reversed?
She also knows people who know people. So.
Okay, got
it. It should be reversed, but no, she's like, hey, I'm going to go get a banana plant. I'm like, well, I'll let you if you want to get me one too.
Well, there you go. I love it. That's awesome. Liz is the hookup for bananas. I'm making notes here.
She is the hookup for like weird stuff to go try. Because I mean, part of gardening is kind of pushing the envelope, and that's where your independent garden centers kind of come into play, where they will still carry some plants that will kind of push the envelope. Like you and Malie talked about, like pawpaws, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, pawpaws aren't really zoned for here. I mean, I think they're like a zone 5, but they like different soils. They like higher humidity. But, a lot of times people who, are nursery employees or own nurseries, they'll try to push the envelope a little bit as well. And so, we don't mind sharing that knowledge to help you be successful, rather than you just buying something off the shelf at box store A and slamming it in the ground, watching it die and not understanding why.
Yeah. And I think you just hit on the key point too, is that Malie and Liz Hamilton and yourself, you're expert gardeners. You know what you're doing. You know in advance that, hey, this is a little bit touch and go with the specific variety of what I'm trying to do, but I'm going to experiment. And you also know, hey, this is going to need to be watered more or watered less. You're going to know this is going to need really acidic soil. Like I know Liz grows blueberries. Well, and I know Lorene Boutner does it too, but most average Utah gardeners can't pluck a blueberry plant into the ground and think that it's going to work, because it won't. It needs a really specialty situation in order to do it. And the experts really know. And I think that's what you're saying, is just that the hardiness zone map is really a guide, and it's only just telling you what plants are more likely to thrive in a location based on the weather, but not the soil.
Right. Yeah, the amount of course. So now the one thing that I will say about the USDA zone map, okay, is it does give you a big piece of the puzzle to eliminate a lot of plants that you want to do. Okay. Yeah. So if you were like, okay, I want a zone 5 plant, okay, that eliminates anything that's outside of that. So, every once in a while we'll get a California transplant that says, hey, do you have any lantanas? No, they don't live here.
Yeah.
Right. Or hey, what about bougainvilleas? I mean, I see bougainvilleas everywhere, just on the hillsides in California, right? It's like, well, if they hit 50 degrees here, they're dead. That's what happens here in Utah. So they're like a zone 10, zone 11 or something like that. But, again, it's something that gives you a starting point in your research. Start with zone, then start looking to moisture requirements, then start looking to soil requirements, whether it's like acid or alkaline, what they kind of prefer there. Because, again, if you go to box stores, you'll find heathers, rhododendrons and azaleas, flowering dogwood trees that, you'll just find stuff there that doesn't thrive here. And you might get a season out of it and it's done. which is fine. I mean, if you want to have an azalea for a year and use it as an annual, great. But don't expect it to come back year after year after year.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the mandevilla vines that they sell at Costco every year that inevitably die the second the even first touch of frost happens in the fall. I actually did try to. Oh, French lavender. Yes, of course. And that's tricky. That's tricky and mean, though, because a lot of lavender does grow well in Utah. And I think if you're just the general, like, oh, yeah, lavender grows in Utah, you can be really tricked.
You can.
Right?
I see it all the time. Costco's been tricking people for a long time with those little bald lavender plants.
Oh, for real. And the mandevillas and and the lady the other day, and I don't believe she bought this from Costco, but I did see the post about the dead fuchsias. She got super excited, bought a whole bunch of fuchsias at the probably a big box garden center, which is fine. But you just really need to look at that zone, look at that research and know, just because I can doesn't mean I should. Maybe I'll wait until the frost is over and then come back and get it, right? And then you'll just have it during the summer. Or you've got to know this is going to need to stay in the garage for a while, or I'll have to baby it and bring it in every single day. But if you miss one day, you're out.
Right. So I'm just here to try to manage expectations for people or help people manage their own expectations by US hardiness zones.
Absolutely, for sure. Okay, so we're up against a break, but when we come back, I've got another really big question for you that impacts all of this as well. So we'll be right back after this right here on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jana Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and with me here is Cameron Alcott with ProgressivePlants.com, and we're talking about USDA hardiness zones and how you can really analyze it best and the things that you need to know when you're picking plants for your garden, really. And I've got a good question for you, Cameron. So in the last segment, we talked about the types of plants that you should select in addition to the hardiness zone. But another thought is microclimates. So meaning, yeah, I know. And I know you're an expert in microclimates too, because, and to the listener, what I mean by microclimate isn't necessarily like, I don't necessarily mean this neighborhood versus that neighborhood. I mean more like the fact that you're a little bit lower in the valley, or you're right by a river, or you've got a fence that is, radiating a ton of heat into a certain area, or maybe you've got a massive tree that's putting a whole bunch of shade in a certain part of your yard, right? So microclimates, how does that impact what we're talking about here?
Oh, it can impact things a lot. I love to find little microclimates in yards to where I can experiment and do a couple of things. So for instance, a really common microclimate that I will usually find is the north sides of buildings. So one of the challenges that I feel like we kind of have here in northern Utah specifically is that over the winter, we seem to go through like these freeze thaw cycles, through like December, January, and February. And that can cause a lot of issues for a lot of trees. So for instance, a lot of your Japanese maples, actually most maples, they have a really thin bark, and so they get really affected by the freeze thaw cycles that we get. Because as we warm up, the cambium starts like flowing. There's you get like a lot of water going through there, and then we freeze really hard at night. Sometimes that causes the cambium layer to kind of explode or get injured or whatever, so the cells will explode or whatnot. And then that'll kill the tops of maples a lot of times. Sometimes with crab apples, if they're a small enough caliper, like a small enough thickness on the trunk, they'll actually start to peel the bark away. I had that happen a couple of years ago at the nursery, where I probably lost like $20,000 worth of small trees. And they were all crab apples. It just affected those crab apples because at that time of the year, enough sap was flowing and then if we froze really hard, is that it's literally separated the bark from the rest of the trunk. It was kind of bizarre. I've had a couple of buddies up in Idaho who also grow crab apples, have had the same type of thing. So
Really?
yeah, it happens, but, to kind of go back to the microclimates, on the north sides of buildings, like during the winter, typically houses are really going to shelter the plants there from that rapid freeze thaw cycle, because they're always going to be frozen. Like the sun never hits them. So the sap never starts flowing. So they're almost safer, so when you have like Japanese maples, for instance, I always kind of say, hey, plant these on the north side of your building where they get some protection. Okay. They don't go through that freeze thaw cycle. A lot of times the winds don't come from the north a ton. So they don't really get desiccated very much. So a lot of times Japanese maples look great on the north sides of buildings. East sides of buildings are, generally pretty safe as well, because then they're, protected from the prevailing like western winds. So
Right.
you can get away with a lot of things in those areas. You could also look at your snow melt in your yard as well, and look to see where the snow is melting first. That's going to be the warmer areas of your yard. Okay. There are some plants, for instance, like there's a lot of plants that grow down south, like different type of like salvias, penstemons, things that are more, adapted to a slightly warmer climate with less snowfall. We get kind of hammered here with snow in the, the valleys up here because of the lakes and whatnot, except for last year.
Yeah.
So typically speaking, you can get away with some plants that don't mind being a little bit drier up here in the valleys. So like, trying to think of a good example, like Salvia pachyphylla, Mojave sage. That's what that one is. So that particular perennial doesn't really like to be, sorry, I think in terms of Latin. It's
No,
like the
that's
one language that I know.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but that was so amazing. Like for you, the Latin, really confusing name to other people was more natural than like you had to really think hard about what it's really called to us normal people.
That's, yeah, I know. Well, it happens because people will come up, to ask me, hey, do you have so-and-so plant? And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. And they're like, well, and then they'll bust out a picture, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that's Pseudotsuga benzii.
Oh my word.
So,
okay, carry on.
Sorry.
No, I digress.
Yeah, but anyway, so like, the Mojave sage really doesn't like to be covered in snow. Like it just, that all that moisture will just kind of like destroy the crown of the plant. They really like being dry. So, if you plant that in a warmer part of your yard where the snow melts really fast, like getting a little bit of snow, as long as it melts away, it's totally fine, as long as it has the ability to dry out. Some plants are going to be more sensitive to being covered in snow than others.
And in snow, really, I know that on grass, it's not as positive, but in general, of your plant material, it can be an amazing insulator and really keep the temperatures consistent, which plants love.
That is also true. So, this is where it gets into like every plant's requirements are going to be a little different. So again, asking independent garden center employees or owners or growers or purchaser, anybody in the independent garden center, we all live to experiment with plants and we all learn. I've always had a little bit of an unfair advantage because like we grow so much of our own material. Like I've been able to understand what killed stuff, because I get to mess with it, and I get to experiment and try different things. So I've been very blessed and very, very lucky of having that experience in my life. Anyway, but yeah, the snow cover is actually not a bad thing, because everything underneath a lot of snow is usually somewhere around 20 to 32 degrees typically, so it creates like a great insulation. But, if you have plants that are sensitive to moisture, it's not going to really be that great of a condition for it. And that, that mostly goes for like your desert plants. So, if you're doing things like manzanitas, like that Mojave sage that I was telling you about, even echinacea, most of the echinaceas don't like to be covered in snow. They actually like to be exposed. So,
I actually discovered that the echinaceas I had on the northeast side of my home died out, but the others that are on the southwest side are doing just fine. And that's exactly what you just described, for sure.
Because it dries out on the southwest side all the time, every single winter, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So, kind of understanding the conditions that it in goes a really long way into your success into a landscape. So, if you're going to do some of those riskier types of plants, really do your research and find out, A, zone, B, microclimate, and just really understand your yard. Another microclimate that gets overlooked quite a bit is fences, buildings, structures like that. So there was rock mulch. That's another one. So if you're using rocks in your planter beds, that's going to create issues for you if you choose the wrong plants. Okay.
Because it generates too much heat?
Yeah. So rocks and anything, concrete, buildings, all of those things, they absorb all of the heat during the day and then they release it at night. I mean, it's what do they call it? Like urban heat index is what they kind of talk about it, for urban areas, how they're just warmer.
Right.
Because the buildings are all radiating heat. Sidewalks are radiating heat after they collect that all day long. I mean, where does the snow first melt on it melts on your driveway before it melts on the grass, right? Because it radiates heat. So that's something to consider as well. So, I mean, a lot of things that I see a lot of times is that people put arborvitaes in rock mulch beds, and then the bottoms of the arborvitaes just cook, and there's nothing that you can do about it because you can't possibly add enough water because the plant doesn't suck water up fast enough to compensate for the evaporation out of the leaves. So it burns.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. But you are safer if you use a juniper in that particular situation because they are more adapted to the arid conditions and the heat that we get here. So, because if you go down south, into St. George, or even on the drive to Cedar City or Moab or anything like that, you will see junipers there that are all fine and happy and hunky-dory, even though it's 110 degrees outside and there's no plants on the ground to shelter it from the radiating heat of all of the rocks and sand there.
Interesting. That's a really good point. So
yeah, things to think about when you are planning your yard, because a lot of times people don't think I just want to put a fence here, or I just want to put this shed here and I want to cover it with this plant, or again, rock mulch. I mean, I don't particularly like it because I think it really limits your plant choices, and a lot of people think that it's going to be less work and less maintenance, but the reality of it is that, weeds still grow in it.
Yes.
Weeds still get in it. Fruit, dust, all that type of stuff. It is almost impossible to keep clean. And it just, radiates heat and then just really severely limits your plant choices. So
totally. And I don't think people realize that. I mean, I can just see a scenario where you've bought these plants from the garden center, you plant them and it's oh, honey, we need mulch. Will you go pick something up? Well, and there's not a lot of thought around, hey, or even the realization, I don't even mean thought, but just the knowledge to know what mulch I put under this plant can dramatically impact its survival rate. I mean, a lot of people, I just don't even think to need to know that, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And rubber mulch. I mean, a lot of people have started to use that, and that is horrific to plants. They generate so much heat or radiate so much heat after they collect it all day long that it can just wreak havoc on any of the plants that you do. The best way that I've found to cool off your yard and to make it a little bit more comfortable to be in is to actually plant more plants and use more organic type mulches bark or soil pep or something that is organic that can break down, that helps retain some of the moisture, raise the ambient humidity a little bit. I mean, you can counteract the urban heat island, type thing by, just adding more vegetation. Like my mom, for instance, 30 years ago when we planted her house, we got some beech trees and they are absolutely huge. And now she doesn't have to turn on her air conditioning until July.
Amazing.
Because it shades her house so much.
That is so cool. That is so cool. Okay, we'll be right back after this on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. 860 KKAT with more of the fastest growing show on radio. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and I'm here with the all-knowing Cameron Alcott of all Latin names of all plants.
Oh, I'm not that good.
Yes, you are.
Plenty of people who are smarter.
I need to come up with a Latin name for your name and only call you that. I shouldn't have said that and just come up with one and then joke to you. I'll do that in a future episode. Okay. I digress again. So today we're discussing the USDA Plant Hardiness Zone Map. We've been discussing microclimates, and really I think the gist of a lot of what we're getting into is proper plant selection, and that it's not just the hardiness zone, whether it's labeled for zone 5 or zone 7. And there's so many other factors. So we've discussed a lot of those, but also the fact that it's so important to really, if you don't know, really rely on your local garden center for that information, because there are amazing experts there at those nurseries that can help you with that plant selection. And you were just mentioning columbine and like how, go over that analogy, because I thought that was so interesting.
Well, okay. So the other thing to kind of consider too is that, we talk about like the cold tolerances of plants a lot of times, it's like the USDA hardiness zone, like winters, whatever, yada, yada, yada. But what we also don't take into consideration are the heat tolerances of what things will take either. So like columbine, for instance, a lot of the different versions of columbine that are out there, which there are a ton, they don't really particularly like really high temperatures. Peonies would be another example. I mean, they do great here in the valleys. I mean, they're absolutely fantastic. But a lot of times by August, after they've been exposed to 100-degree heat, they start to go brown and then they just go dormant again. Bleeding hearts are the same way. Like they come out, they look beautiful in the spring. July rolls around, it's 100 degrees. They're like, oh, peace out. I'll see you next year. But we all think that they're dead. But they always come back. Also trees, for instance, everybody goes up into the mountains, they find subalpine firs. I mean, we get so many requests for subalpine firs because they grow up in the mountains and they smell so good and they're so pretty. They have a great shape. They're nice and layered and symmetrical. They're wonderful. They don't appreciate 100 degrees either. Okay? Yeah. They live in environments that at most get about like 85. They might hit 90, but it's only for a couple of days. I mean, tolerating something for like a week is one thing. Asking a plant to tolerate 110 degrees for 2 months is something else, So just because it's a zone 2, and it's hardiness to that cold doesn't mean it's going to thrive in a zone 5 or a zone 6 or a zone 7. Use the right plant for the right spot is basically what I'm saying. Understand what is going to work.
Yeah, just because we're in this zone and anything doesn't mean that anything below it is going to thrive here.
Correct. Like another thing that gets thrown out quite a bit too is the whole idea of, it's native here, so it'll be fine. Okay. So subalpine firs are native, but if you stick them in the valley, they're going to die. I mean, there's exceptions to every rule. I mean, there's these things called microclimates that we just talked about. The ironic thing is that I've got 2 subalpine firs in my office at the nursery that have been in for 15 years and they look fantastic. But I would never tell anybody to do what we're doing here.
Right.
So, just kind of understanding that Rocky Mountain maples are another one. Everyone's like, oh, the Rocky Mountain maple is native here. In the mountains.
And let's talk about aspens too.
That's a swear word.
It
Jana,
really
I can't believe you just said that.
I know. It's just like, please don't plant. I know they sound beautiful. Well, first of all, they're gorgeous. Second of all, they sound beautiful whistling in the wind outside your bedroom window in the cool breeze. And you will hate yourself the rest of your life.
Exactly. I mean, Yeah, they're never that pretty down here in the valley. They burn a lot on the edges. They get some fungus, especially after we get like the typical August monsoons. They'll get like a what's it called, like shotgun fungus, or I can't remember exactly which one it is. But they just end up looking terrible. They get stressed, so then that opens the doors to like secondary infections like borers, and so they end up being like a short-lived tree. And and then when they get stressed, they start suckering everywhere, and then they sucker in your neighbor's yard. Yeah. So don't plant aspen.
Yeah, leave those up in the beautiful mountains where they should be.
Yeah, take a drive, go outside, enjoy it out in the mountains, enjoy nature, get out and go see them.
Yes.
Don't bring them home.
Unless, of course, you're building a mountain home. I think a lot of times I'm thinking, just because where I live here in the valley, and there, of course, we have listeners. My goodness, we've got listeners in Australia even. But, do
not ship them aspen. That is a terrible thing to do to them.
Right. I'll trade them a didgeridoo. That's what I'll do. But yeah, so it's quite interesting. And what would be your advice for a colder part of Utah? Because really, here in the valley, we're pretty lucky as far as the 4 seasons, but there's other parts of Utah that are freaking cold.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the colder that you get, your plant selection is a little bit more limited. So really there's a lot of cultivars of like the natives that are around that have been bred to have like some sort of landscape value. So like there's like a lot of currants, for instance, like the golden currant that is, native up in the mountains and whatnot. There's actually a couple of different cultivars now. I think one's like Gwen Orchard or whatever, where there are like some desirable traits with them or Gwen's Buffalo, that's what it is. Buffalo Gwens, I can't remember. They're coming out with all sorts of stuff, but they've actually had like some more desirable traits where like maybe they're bigger fruit or more fruit or something, like that make them a little bit more desirable. And, work with what you got. I mean, everything's got like some degree of value to it. So again, still go to your local garden center too, because they're the ones that like to experiment and do more stuff.
Absolutely. And we've got, believe it or not, we only have 50 seconds left of this episode. So what do you think?
Oh, wow.
I know. What can listeners expect from garden centers this year? Because the selection is getting low, right?
Yes. Everybody bought all of 2021's inventory in 2020. So if you see something, go buy it right now, because it will not be available until sometime next year. My inventory will probably get a little bit better in like June or July because we grow our own stuff, and so we can kind of supplement. But trees are going to be a problem for probably the next 5 to 10 years.
Wow. Okay.
So get your trees now while you can.
All right. I'll need to put that in the episode notes. Well, thanks for being here, Cameron. This was really interesting and fun, and I'm going to come up with a nickname for you. A Latin nickname. Well, that's it for today's episode of Gardening Utah. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. As always, let me know what you'd like to see on the show. You can message me on Instagram. Our handle is @GardeningUtah. Or if you hit up the episode notes on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can see links to a lot of things that we talked about today. And you can link over to our social media and check out our Instagram, our Facebook, and send us a message that way as well. And while you're there, make sure you're subscribed to the show. And you know what? Give me a 5-star rating. I would love you for it. And if you give us a review and give us some love, we'll give it right back to you and read it on the show. Thanks again for listening. Shout out to our producer, Lambo. I'm Jana Francis. We'll see you next week here on Gardening Utah. And remember, grow big or go home.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah. Available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.
We are supported by ProgressivePlant.com. They are the experts that the professionals go to for all things plants. Progressive Plants has over 1 million plants at their 100-acre nursery up in Copperton. And you can shop those plants from right at home at ProgressivePlants.com. They are your neighbor's next door and experts at helping you choose the perfect and unique plants that will thrive in your location. Progressive Plants is passionate about helping homeowners, expert gardeners, novices alike choose the correct plant plant for your soil. They don't just grow plants, they know plants. Let Progressive Plants help you today. Just go to progressiveplants.com and check out their wide selection. You can also go to the Design tab and look at the expert designers that they have that can help you plan your perfect yard. Visit progressiveplants.com today.